An elderly woman lived alone on her ranch. One day, a horse invaded her property, making a mess of everything in sight. The old woman decides to confront it, approaching to protect her land. When she discovers the reason for the animal's restlessness, she nearly faints. Before hearing this story, remember to subscribe to the channel for more exciting tales. The sun had barely risen when Miss Eleanor opened the heavy curtains of her ranch house. Her tired eyes scanned the familiar landscape, the vast green field dotted with a few century-old trees, and in the background, the imposing mountains that seemed to touch the sky. It was a view she knew by heart, but never failed to admire. With slow but determined steps, she headed to the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the scent of old wood that lined the walls. Eleanor picked up her favorite mug, a gift from her late husband Arthur, and poured herself the steaming liquid. As she savored her coffee, her thoughts drifted to the days when the ranch was full of life. The laughter of children echoing through the yard, the sound of horses' hooves pounding on the dirt ground, and Arthur's deep voice calling the workers for another day's work. Now all that remained was silence, broken only by the occasional birdsong. Eleanor sighed deeply. Loneliness had been her constant companion since Arthur passed away 5 years ago. Her children, now adults with families of their own, visited sporadically, but most of the time she spent alone, tending to the house and her small garden. Finishing her coffee, she slipped on her worn boots and went out for her morning walk. Dew still covered the grass, reflecting the first rays of sunlight like tiny diamonds scattered on the ground. Eleanor took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh morning air. That's when she heard it. A distant but unmistakable sound, the neighing of a horse. Intrigued, Eleanor stopped and strained her ears. There hadn't been horses on the ranch for years. Since Arthur's passing, she had sold all the animals, keeping only a few chickens for eggs. The sound grew louder, closer, and then she saw it. Emerging from behind a group of trees, a majestic black horse galloped towards her. Its coat shone under the morning sun, and its mane flowed in the wind like an ebony flag. It was an impressive sight, almost unreal. Eleanor's heart raced. Instinctively, she took a step back, feeling a mixture of fear and admiration. The horse kept advancing, its eyes fixed on her. As it approached, Eleanor noticed something else. The animal was limping slightly, and there were marks on its body that didn't seem natural. When the horse came within a few meters, it stopped abruptly. Its large, expressive eyes met Eleanor's. At that moment, something inexplicable happened. The old woman felt as if she could see the animal's soul, a wounded soul, but still strong and proud. The horse neighed again, but this time the sound was different. It wasn't a sound of challenge or threat, but something that sounded almost like a plea for help. Eleanor, overcoming her initial fear, took a hesitant step towards the animal. "Easy there, boy," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "Nobody's going to hurt you here." The horse snorted softly, as if understanding her words. Eleanor continued to approach, with slow and careful movements. When she was close enough to touch the animal, she extended her hand, letting it hover in the air inches from the horse's muzzle. For a moment that seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, gently, the horse touched its muzzle to Eleanor's hand. The touch was warm and soft, and sent a shiver down the old woman's spine. Tears began to form in her eyes, though she didn't know exactly why. "You're hurt, aren't you?" she asked softly, examining the animal's body. Now that she was closer, she could clearly see the scars and half-healed wounds that marked its coat. "Who did this to you?" The horse responded with a low neigh, almost a moan. Eleanor felt her heart tighten. At that moment, she made a decision that would change her life forever. "Come," she said, turning towards the house. "Let's take care of you." To her surprise, the horse followed her obediently, its steps still a bit hesitant due to the limp. Eleanor guided it to the old stable, which hadn't been used in years. The smell of old hay and damp wood filled her nostrils as she opened the creaky door. "It's not much, but it'll do for now," she murmured, more to herself than to the horse. "Tomorrow I'll clean this up properly and make a suitable place for you." She went to the house and came back with a bucket of fresh water and some apple pieces she found in the fridge. The horse drank eagerly and accepted the apples with evident gratitude in its eyes. As the animal ate, Eleanor examined its wounds more closely. Some seemed old, but others were recent and needed care. "I'll need supplies," she thought. "Tomorrow I'll go to town to buy what's necessary." When it finished eating, the horse approached Eleanor and gently rested its head on her shoulder. It was such a gentle gesture, so full of trust, that the old woman felt tears return to her eyes. "It's all right now," she whispered, stroking the animal's neck. "You're safe here." That night, for the first time in years, Eleanor went to bed with a smile on her face and a sense of purpose in her heart. As she drifted off to sleep, her thoughts were filled with plans for the next day and for the future, with her new and unexpected companion. Outside, in the newly occupied stable, the majestic black horse rested, finally feeling safe after what seemed to have been years of suffering. The gentle night wind carried a promise of better days, both for the animal and for the lonely lady who had taken it in. And so, under the starry sky of the ranch, a new story began to unfold. A story of unlikely friendship, of healing, and of second chances. The following day dawned with a different energy on Miss Eleanor's ranch. For the first time in years, she woke up before the sun rose, eager to start her new tasks. She dressed quickly and headed out to the stable, carrying a bucket of fresh water and some carrots she had found in the refrigerator. As she opened the stable door, she was greeted by a soft neigh. The black horse was standing, its bright eyes fixed on her. Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Good morning, big guy," she said, approaching carefully. "Did you sleep well?" The horse snorted softly in response, as if understanding every word. Eleanor offered him the carrots, which he accepted enthusiastically. While the animal ate, she took the opportunity to examine him better in the daylight. The scars on his body were more evident now, some still recent and painful. Eleanor felt a wave of indignation. Who could have been so cruel to such a noble creature? "Don't worry," she murmured, stroking the horse's neck. "I'll take care of you. No one's going to hurt you again." After ensuring the horse was comfortable, Eleanor returned to the house to prepare for her trip to town. It had been weeks since she had left the ranch, and the prospect of making this journey made her a bit anxious. But the need to care for her new friend gave her courage. In town, Eleanor visited the farm supply store, buying fresh hay, quality feed, and veterinary supplies. The owner, Mr. Johnson, a grey-haired gentleman with a friendly smile, looked at her curiously. "Miss Eleanor, what a surprise to see you here. I thought you had sold all the animals on the ranch." Eleanor hesitated for a moment before responding. "Well, John, let's just say I've gained an unexpected guest." The man raised his eyebrows, intrigued, but didn't ask any more questions. Eleanor silently thanked him for his discretion. Back at the ranch, she spent the rest of the day cleaning and organizing the stable. The work was arduous, especially for someone her age, but Eleanor felt invigorated. Every time she looked at the horse, she saw in him not just an injured animal, but a new chance to have a purpose. As the days passed, a routine began to establish itself. Every morning, Eleanor woke up early to feed and care for the horse. She carefully cleaned his wounds, applied the medications she had bought, and spent hours brushing his coat until it shone. The horse, in turn, seemed to flourish under her care. His wounds began to heal, and his gait became firmer. He followed Eleanor everywhere, like a black and imposing shadow. One afternoon, as Eleanor sat on the porch admiring the sunset, the horse approached and lay down beside her, resting his head on her lap. The old woman felt tears in her eyes, moved by this gesture of trust. "You know," she said, stroking the animal's mane, "I think it's time to give you a name. I can't keep calling you Horse forever, can I?" She fell silent for a few moments, thoughtful. "How about Shadow? Because of your color, and because you've been my faithful shadow these days." The horse neighed softly as if approving the name. Eleanor smiled. "Shadow it is, then." As the weeks passed, the bond between Eleanor and Shadow grew even stronger. The old woman discovered a new energy in herself, waking up each day with a renewed purpose. She began to take better care of the garden, planted new flowers, and even considered reopening parts of the ranch that had been abandoned after Arthur's passing. One morning, while feeding the chickens, Eleanor heard the sound of a car approaching. Surprised, as she rarely received visitors, she walked to the ranch entrance. A familiar car parked, and her oldest son, Robert, got out. "Mom!" he exclaimed, hugging her. "How are you?" "I tried calling, but you didn't answer. So I got worried and decided to come see how you were doing." Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. In the past few weeks, she had been so absorbed in caring for Shadow that she had neglected the phone. "I'm great, son," she replied with a smile. "Just been a bit busy." Robert looked around, noticing the changes on the ranch. The better-maintained garden, the freshly painted fence. "I can see that. But what happened? You seem different." Before Eleanor could answer, a strong neigh echoed through the air. Shadow appeared, galloping majestically across the field, his black coat gleaming under the morning sun. Robert was dumbfounded. "Mom, where did that horse come from?" Eleanor smiled, her eyes shining in a way Robert hadn't seen in years. "It's a long story, son. Why don't we go inside? I'll make some coffee and tell you all about it." As they walked towards the house, with Shadow following at a respectful distance, Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude. Her life, which had seemed to have reached a dead end after losing Arthur, was now full of new possibilities. Robert observed his mother with a mixture of surprise and joy. There was a vitality in her that he hadn't seen since his father was alive. Whatever this mysterious black horse had brought to Miss Eleanor's life, it was clear that it had awakened something in her that everyone thought was lost forever. Inside the house, as the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, Eleanor began to tell Robert the story of how Shadow entered her life. Her eyes sparkled as she described the day the injured horse appeared on her property and how caring for him had given new meaning to her existence. Robert listened attentively, alternating his gaze between his mother and the imposing animal, now grazing peacefully in the field, visible through the kitchen window. He realized that something profound had changed, not just on the ranch, but in his mother. "You know, Mom," he finally said, holding Eleanor's hand, "I confess I was worried about you living here alone. But now, well, it seems you've found new company." Eleanor smiled, squeezing her son's hand. "Shadow brought me more than company, Robert. He brought me a purpose, a reason to wake up every day with energy. It's as if a part of me that was asleep had awakened." Robert nodded, moved. "I'm happy, Mom. Very happy." As they talked, neither of them noticed the distant figure observing the ranch from the road. A rough-looking man, mounted on an old motorcycle, stared fixedly at the black horse in the field. His eyes narrowed, a crooked smile forming on his lips. "So this is where you've been hiding, you bastard," he muttered to himself. "Don't worry, soon enough we'll meet again." The man started his motorcycle and quickly drove away, leaving only a cloud of dust behind. The peace that had settled on Miss Eleanor's ranch was about to be disturbed, and neither she nor Shadow suspected the challenges that awaited them. The days following Robert's visit brought a new dynamic to Miss Eleanor's ranch. The news about Shadow spread quickly among family members, and soon the old woman found herself receiving more visits than in the last 5 years combined. Curious grandchildren wanted to see the mysterious black horse, while children and daughters-in-law expressed a mixture of concern and joy over Eleanor's new occupation. For the lady, however, the true joy was in the moments of tranquility she spent with Shadow. Mornings were dedicated to caring for the animal, feeding, grooming, and as his wounds healed, short walks around the ranch grounds. On one of these mornings, as they walked side by side across the field, Eleanor noticed something different in Shadow's behavior. The horse seemed restless, his ears constantly moving, his alert eyes scanning the horizon. "What's wrong, my friend?" Eleanor asked, stroking the animal's neck. "Are you sensing something?" As if answering her question, Shadow let out a low neigh and took a few steps back, gently pulling Eleanor by the sleeve of her shirt. That's when she heard it, the distant sound of a motorcycle approaching. Normally, this wouldn't be cause for concern. After all, the main road wasn't far from the ranch. But something in Shadow's behavior put her on alert. The motorcycle stopped near the property entrance. Eleanor saw a man get off the vehicle and start walking towards the fence. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a confident walk that bordered on arrogance. His face was partially hidden by a worn cowboy hat, but Eleanor could see a scar that cut across his chin. "Hello," the man called out, his hoarse voice echoing across the field. "Are you the owner of this ranch?" Eleanor felt Shadow stir beside her. Instinctively, she positioned herself between the horse and the stranger. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" The man came closer, his eyes scanning the grounds until they fixed on Shadow. A crooked smile formed on his lips. "Beautiful animal you've got there. Looks familiar." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in the way the man looked at Shadow that made her deeply uncomfortable. "He showed up here a few weeks ago," she responded cautiously. "He was injured and in need of care." "Is that so?" The man took another step forward, leaning on the fence. "You know, I'm looking for a horse that got lost. A beautiful black stallion, exactly like this one here." Shadow neighed loudly, nervously stomping the ground. Eleanor could feel the fear emanating from the animal. At that moment she understood. This man must be responsible for Shadow's scars and suffering. A wave of protectiveness washed over her, mixed with a courage she didn't know she still possessed. "I'm sorry, sir, but this horse is under my care now, and from what I can see, he has no desire to go with you." The man's smile disappeared, replaced by a hard expression. "Look here, lady, that horse is my property. It cost me a fortune, and I've spent weeks looking for it. Now that I've found it, I intend to take it back." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, facing the stranger's gaze. "I don't see any ownership mark on him, and even if there was, I wouldn't hand over an animal to someone who clearly mistreated it." The man let out a dry laugh. "You don't know who you're messing with, Grandma. That horse is too valuable for me to just walk away without it." "And you don't know who you're dealing with," Eleanor shot back, her voice firm. "This is my property, and I'm asking you to leave. Now." For a tense moment, the two stared at each other. Eleanor could feel her heart beating hard in her chest, but she didn't back down. Finally, the man took a step back. "All right, lady. I'll go, for now. But don't think this is over." He cast one last look at Shadow before turning away. "We'll see each other again, Stallion. You can bet on it." Eleanor watched as the man returned to his motorcycle and drove off, leaving a cloud of dust behind. Only when the sound of the engine completely disappeared did she allow her shoulders to relax. Turning to Shadow, she hugged him, feeling the tremor that still ran through the animal's body. "It's okay, my friend. He's gone. I won't let anyone take you away from here." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with worries. Who was that man? What did he really want with Shadow? And more importantly, how could she, an elderly lady living alone, protect the horse if he decided to come back? For the first time since Shadow had arrived, Eleanor felt afraid. Not for herself, but for the animal that had become so important in her life. She knew she needed to do something, but what? The next morning, still tired from a sleepless night, Eleanor made a decision. After caring for Shadow and ensuring he was safe in the stable, she picked up the phone and called her son Robert. "Son," she said as soon as he answered, "I need your help. Something happened yesterday and, well, I think Shadow might be in danger." As she explained the situation to Robert, Eleanor looked out the window, observing the field where just a day before she and Shadow had been walking peacefully. The peace she had found now seemed threatened, but she was determined to fight. Shadow had given her a new reason to live, and she would do the same for him. "Don't worry, Mom." Robert's voice sounded reassuring on the other end of the line. "I'm on my way. We'll figure this out together." As she hung up the phone, Eleanor felt a mixture of relief and determination. The future was uncertain, but one thing she knew for sure. She wouldn't let Shadow's dark past catch up with him. Not as long as it depended on her. With that thought in mind, she walked to the stable. Shadow greeted her with a soft neigh, as if sensing her concern. Eleanor stroked his muzzle, looking into the animal's eyes. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "We're in this together, and together we'll overcome any obstacle." The sun was beginning to rise on the horizon, casting a golden light over the ranch. A new day was beginning, bringing with it challenges and uncertainties. But it also brought hope, and for Eleanor and Shadow at that moment, hope was all they needed. The familiar rumble of Robert's car echoed down the dirt road leading to the ranch. Eleanor, who had been on the porch since dawn, felt immediate relief at seeing her son arrive. Beside her, Shadow remained alert, his ears moving at the slightest sound. Robert parked and quickly got out of the car, hugging his mother as soon as he reached her. "Mom, are you okay?" I came as fast as I could. Eleanor nodded, feeling stronger with her son's presence. I'm fine, dear. It's Shadow I'm worried about. As they walked towards the stable, Eleanor recounted in detail the encounter with the stranger. Robert listened attentively, his expression becoming more serious with each word. "This is serious, Mom," he said, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of concern. "This man sounds dangerous. Maybe we should call the police." Eleanor hesitated. "And say what? That a man came to claim a horse that appeared out of nowhere on my property. We don't have any proof of anything." Robert reluctantly agreed. "You're right, but we can't just wait for him to come back." At that moment, Shadow approached, gently nudging Eleanor's shoulder with his muzzle. The old woman smiled, stroking the animal's neck. "Don't worry, my friend. We'll find a solution." That's when Robert had an idea. What if we installed security cameras? At least we'd have evidence if that man came back. Eleanor considered the suggestion. Normally, she would resist the idea of having cameras on her property, valuing her privacy, but circumstances had changed. "I think that might be a good idea," she finally agreed. In the days that followed, Robert worked tirelessly to enhance the ranch's security. Besides the cameras, he fixed broken fences, installed motion sensor lights, and even hired a security guard to do nightly rounds. Eleanor observed the changes with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. On one hand, she felt safer. On the other, she lamented that her peaceful life had been disrupted so abruptly. One evening, as she and Robert were talking on the porch, the sky began to darken rapidly. Heavy clouds formed on the horizon, and the wind started to blow forcefully. "Looks like a storm's coming," Robert commented, looking worriedly at the sky. Eleanor nodded, suddenly remembering something. "Shadow!" "He gets nervous with thunder. I need to stay with him in the stable." Ignoring Robert's protests, Eleanor hurriedly made her way to the stable. Inside, she found Shadow agitated, neighing softly and moving restlessly. "Shh, it's all right," she whispered, approaching slowly. "I'm here with you." The first thunderclap echoed, making the entire stable tremble. Shadow reared up, frightened. Eleanor, without thinking twice, hugged the horse's neck, speaking words of comfort. "Calm down, my dear, it's just noise, it won't hurt you." Gradually, Shadow calmed down, responding to Eleanor's reassuring presence. The storm raged outside, but inside the stable, horse and lady found comfort in each other. Robert, who had followed his mother, observed the scene from the stable door, marveling at the bond between the two. It was at this moment that he truly understood how much Shadow meant to his mother. The night wore on, and the storm continued. Eleanor refused to leave Shadow, so Robert brought blankets and hot coffee. Together, mother and son spent the night in the stable, watching over the horse's restless sleep. When day finally dawned, the storm had passed. Eleanor, exhausted but satisfied, stroked Shadow, who seemed calmer and even a bit embarrassed by his nocturnal fear. "See," she murmured to the horse, "we got through this together. And we'll get through anything else that comes our way." Robert, observing the scene, felt a wave of emotion. His mother, who for so long had seemed just a shadow of herself after losing his father, now radiated strength and determination. "Mom," he called softly. When Eleanor turned, he continued, "I think I have an idea of how we can protect Shadow permanently." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, curious. "And what would that be?" Robert smiled. "What if we legalized the situation? We could officially register Shadow as yours. That way, even if that man comes back, he won't have any legal right to the horse." Eleanor's eyes lit up. "Is that possible?" "It'll take work," Robert admitted. "We'll have to prove that Shadow was abandoned when you found him, get veterinary exams, fill out a ton of paperwork. But yes, it's possible." Eleanor looked at Shadow, who returned her gaze with his large, expressive eyes. "Then that's what we'll do," she declared firmly. "Shadow deserves a safe home, and we're going to make sure he has that." At that moment, with the rising sun illuminating the stable, a new chapter was opening in Eleanor and Shadow's life. The challenges weren't over. In fact, they might just be beginning. But now they had a plan, a clear purpose. As they left the stable to face the new day, Eleanor felt a renewed energy coursing through her veins. The previous night's storm had passed, but it had left behind a valuable lesson. Together, they were stronger than any adversity. With Shadow by her side and the support of her family, Eleanor was ready to fight for the future they both deserved. The journey would be long, but she knew that every step would be worth it. After all, it wasn't just Shadow's freedom at stake, but also the new life she had found thanks to him. The sun shone brightly, drying the last traces of the night storm. It was a new beginning full of promises and possibilities, and Eleanor was determined to make the most of it. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity on Miss Eleanor's ranch. Robert, determined to fulfill his promise, dove headfirst into the process of legalizing Shadow. He spent hours on the phone talking to lawyers, veterinarians, and government officials, trying to understand the legal intricacies of registering a seemingly ownerless horse. Eleanor, for her part, dedicated herself entirely to Shadow's care. She knew that the animal's well-being would be crucial for the legalization process. Besides, caring for him was her way of keeping her anxiety under control while waiting for news from Robert. On a sunny afternoon, as Eleanor was brushing Shadow's mane, she heard the familiar sound of Robert's car approaching. Her heart raced with anticipation of news. "So?" she asked as soon as her son got out of the car, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and the folder full of papers in his hands. Robert let out a tired sigh but smiled. "We have a way forward, Mom. It won't be easy, but it's possible." Seated on the porch with Shadow grazing peacefully in the background, Robert explained the process. First, they would need a complete veterinary examination to document Shadow's condition when he arrived at the ranch. Then they would have to make a public announcement looking for possible owners. If no one claimed ownership of the animal after a certain period, Eleanor could then start the process of registering him in her name. "The problem is," Robert continued, his face turning serious, "that if that man shows up during this period and claims Shadow, we'll have difficulties contesting it." Eleanor felt a knot form in her stomach. "And if he does that, what happens to Shadow?" Robert hesitated before answering. "Legally speaking, if he can prove he's the owner, he would have the right to take him. But," he quickly added upon seeing the panic in his mother's eyes, "we can argue about the evident mistreatment. That could give us a chance to keep Shadow here." Eleanor was silent for a moment, processing the information. Finally, she stood up, determination shining in her eyes. "Then that's what we'll do. I won't give up on Shadow without a fight." In the days that followed, the ranch transformed into a center of frantic activity. Dr. Thompson, a kind gentleman with decades of experience, came to examine Shadow. His detailed report documented not only the old scars, but also the remarkable recovery of the animal under Eleanor's care. "Miss Eleanor," Dr. Thompson commented after the examination, "I must say I'm impressed. This animal's progress in such a short time is remarkable. It's evident that he's receiving exceptional care here." The veterinarian's words filled Eleanor with pride and renewed her determination. She knew she was doing the right thing by fighting for Shadow. Meanwhile, Robert took care of the bureaucratic part. Announcements were published in local and regional newspapers, describing Shadow and requesting that anyone with information about his origin contact them. Days turned into weeks, and each day without news was a small victory for Eleanor. However, anxiety never completely left her. Every time she heard the sound of an engine approaching, her heart would race, fearing it might be the stranger coming back to claim Shadow. One afternoon, as Eleanor and Shadow were enjoying a peaceful walk through the ranch fields, she noticed something different in the horse's behavior. He seemed more relaxed, more at ease. His steps, once hesitant, were now firm and confident. "You're feeling at home, aren't you?" Eleanor murmured, stroking Shadow's neck. The horse responded with a soft neigh, as if confirming her words. At that moment, Eleanor had an epiphany. Regardless of the legal outcome, Shadow had already found his home, and she would do everything in her power to ensure it stayed that way. When they returned to the house, they found Robert waiting on the porch, his face a mixture of emotions that Eleanor couldn't immediately decipher. "Mom," he called as soon as he saw them approaching, "we have news." Eleanor felt her heart race. "Good or bad?" Robert hesitated for a moment before answering. "Both, I think. The announcement period is over, and no one officially claimed Shadow." Eleanor let out a sigh of relief, but Robert's expression prevented her from feeling completely at ease. But, Robert continued, his voice becoming more serious, "I received an anonymous call today, someone who claims to have information about Shadow's past and his former owner." The silence that followed was heavy. Eleanor looked at Shadow, who seemed to sense the tension in the air. his large eyes fixed on her as if seeking comfort. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert approached, placing a comforting hand on his mother's shoulder. "We'll listen to what this person has to say, but don't worry, Mom. No matter what happens, we're not alone in this fight." As the sun began to set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Eleanor, Robert, and Shadow remained together on the porch. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The bond between them was too strong to be easily broken. Night fell over the ranch, bringing with it the promise of new challenges. But it also brought hope. And for Eleanor, that hope was enough to face any obstacle that fate might put in her path. The following morning dawned cloudy, as if the sky itself reflected the anxiety that hung over the ranch. Eleanor had barely slept, her mind filled with scenarios about what the mysterious anonymous call might reveal. Shadow, sensing his protector's unease, remained close to the house, softly neighing from time to time, as if offering comfort. Robert arrived early, bringing with him a folder full of documents and a serious demeanor. "Mom," he called as he entered, "the person who called yesterday agreed to meet us. They want to speak in person." Eleanor felt a chill in her stomach. "Here? At the ranch?" Robert shook his head. "No, at a cafe in town. I thought it would be better that way. Neutral ground, you know." The old woman nodded, understanding the logic, but still feeling apprehensive. "When?" "This afternoon," Robert replied, checking his watch. "We have a few hours to prepare." The hours that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Eleanor. She alternated between moments of fierce determination and instances of pure panic. What if this person had information that could take Shadow away from her? What if it was a trap set by that mysterious man? Before they left, Eleanor went to the stable to see Shadow. The horse, sensing her approach, came to the door, his large eyes fixed on her. "Don't worry, my friend," she whispered, stroking his muzzle. "I'll do everything I can to protect you, I promise." The drive to town was silent, the tension palpable inside the car. When they arrived at the agreed cafe, Eleanor felt her heart racing. Robert, noticing his mother's nervousness, held her hand. "We're in this together, Mom. Everything will be all right." They entered the cafe and soon spotted a woman sitting alone in a corner. She appeared to be in her 40s, brown hair tied in a loose bun, and a look that mixed anxiety and determination. "Miss Eleanor?" the woman asked as they approached. Upon receiving an affirmative nod, she continued, "My name is Sarah, thank you for coming." They sat down, and for a few moments an uncomfortable silence hung over the table. It was Sarah who finally broke it. I saw the ads about the black horse," she began, her voice trembling, "and I recognized the description immediately." Eleanor felt her heart tighten. "You know Shadow?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I know him. Or rather, I knew him. He belonged to my ex-husband, Frank." The name fell like a bomb on the table. Robert, who had been silent until then, leaned forward. "Frank? The man who showed up at the ranch?" Sarah confirmed with a sad nod. "Yes, that's him. I need you to understand some things about Frank and about the horse." What followed was a story that left Eleanor and Robert stunned. Sarah recounted how Frank, initially a gentle man and animal lover, gradually transformed into someone cruel and violent. Alcoholism and gambling debts changed him, and the horse, in which he called Thunder, ended up becoming a victim of his fits of rage. "I tried to protect Thunder," Sarah said, tears in her eyes. "But Frank, he would get furious when I interfered. One day, after a particularly nasty fight, Thunder managed to escape. Frank went crazy, searching everywhere. I was relieved when he couldn't find him." Eleanor listened to everything with a broken heart, imagining the suffering that Shadow or Thunder had endured. "Why are you telling us this now?" she asked gently. Sarah took a deep breath before answering. "Because I saw how you cared for him. I read in the papers about the elderly lady who took in an injured horse, saw the photos. Thunder looks happy and healthy for the first time in years, and I couldn't let Frank ruin that." Robert, who had been taking notes, looked at Sarah seriously. "Would you be willing to testify? If we need to go to court to keep Thunder, with us?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, but then nodded firmly. "Yes, I am. I've run away long enough." It's time to do the right thing. The rest of the afternoon was spent discussing details, exchanging information, and planning the next steps. When they finally left the cafe, the sun was already setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. On the way back to the ranch, Eleanor remained silent, absorbing everything she had heard. Her heart ached for Shadow's suffering, but it also filled with renewed determination. Upon arriving, she went straight to the stable. Shadow greeted her with a soft neigh, as if asking where she had been. "Oh, my dear," Eleanor murmured, hugging the horse's neck. "I promise that no one will ever hurt you again. You're home now, forever." As night fell over the ranch, Eleanor felt a mix of emotions: sadness for Shadow's past, gratitude for Sarah's courage, and a fierce determination to protect the animal that had become so important in her life. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: the fight for Shadow was far from over, and Eleanor was ready to face any challenge that came her way, with the strength of her love and the support of her family by her side. The weeks following Sarah's revelation were intense for everyone on the ranch. Robert, armed with the new information, worked tirelessly with a lawyer to build a solid case for Eleanor to keep custody of Shadow. Eleanor, in turn, dedicated every free moment to caring for the horse, as if trying to compensate him for all the past suffering. One sunny morning, as Eleanor was brushing Shadow's mane, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Her heart raced when she recognized Robert's vehicle. From the expression on her son's face, she knew immediately that something important had happened. "Mom," Robert called, even before fully getting out of the car. "We have news. Frank has filed a lawsuit to claim ownership of Shadow." Eleanor felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. Shadow, sensing her agitation, neighed softly, resting his muzzle on her shoulder. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert approached, placing a comforting hand on his mother's shoulder. "We fight, Mom. We have Sarah's testimony, the veterinarian's reports, and all the evidence of the care you've been giving Shadow. It won't be easy, but we have a real chance." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers came and went, documents were signed, and the ranch became a center of legal strategies. Eleanor, despite the stress, remained firm, finding strength in Shadow's constant presence. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. On one side, Eleanor, Robert, Sarah, and their supporters. On the other, Frank, with a grim and determined look. The judge, a middle-aged man with keen eyes, listened attentively to both sides. Frank presented old ownership documents, claiming the horse had been stolen from him. Eleanor's lawyer, in turn, presented evidence of mistreatment, Sarah's emotional testimony, and detailed reports showing Shadow's recovery under Eleanor's care. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she stood up with shaky legs, but a firm voice. "Your Honor," she began, "Shadow came to my ranch injured and scared. I didn't know where he came from, but I knew he needed help. In the months that followed, I saw this animal reborn. He's not just a horse to me. He's a friend, a companion who brought light back into my life. I ask that you consider not just who might have been the original owner, but who truly loves and cares for this animal now." The silence that followed was heavy. The judge seemed thoughtful, his eyes alternating between Eleanor and Frank. After what seemed like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. "This is a complex case," he began, "that involves not only issues of property, but also animal welfare and moral responsibility. Considering all the evidence presented, including Mrs. Sarah's testimony about previous mistreatment, the veterinary reports showing the animal's remarkable recovery, and the clear emotional bond between Ms. Eleanor and the horse, my decision is that permanent custody of Shadow, as he is now known, be granted to Ms. Eleanor." The room erupted in applause and tears of joy. Eleanor, barely able to believe it, hugged Robert and Sarah, tears streaming down her face. Frank, furious, stood up abruptly, but was restrained by his lawyer. With one last angry look at Eleanor, he left the courtroom. The journey back to the ranch was full of emotion and relief. When they finally arrived, Eleanor ran to the stable. Shadow, as if sensing that something important had happened, came to meet her. "It's all right now, my friend," Eleanor whispered, hugging the horse's neck. "You're home. Forever." In the days that followed, a sense of peace settled over the ranch. Eleanor and Shadow spent hours together, riding through the fields, or simply enjoying each other's company. The transformation in both was visible. Shadow, once scared and distrustful, was now a confident and affectionate animal. Eleanor, who used to live in solitude, now radiated an energy and joy that infected everyone around her. One afternoon, as she watched Shadow grazing peacefully, Eleanor reflected on the incredible journey they had taken together. From a chance encounter, a deep friendship had been born, capable of overcoming obstacles and transforming lives. Robert, who had come to visit, joined her on the porch. "You know, Mom," he said with a smile, "I think in the end, it wasn't just you who saved Shadow. In a way, he saved you too." Eleanor nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. "You're right, son. Sometimes angels come in unexpected forms. In my case, it came with 4 legs and a black mane." The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the ranch. Shadow, noticing Eleanor on the porch, trotted towards her, neighing softly. At that moment, surrounded by the love of her family and the loyalty of her unlikely friend, Eleanor knew she had found something precious, a new beginning, a second chance in life. And she was determined to make the most of every moment of this new journey, with Shadow faithfully by her side. Time passed gently on Miss Eleanor's ranch after the legal battle. Seasons came and went, bringing subtle changes to the landscape and the lives of all who lived there. The bond between Eleanor and Shadow continued to strengthen each day, as if every moment together was an affirmation of the journey they had traveled. On a spring morning, exactly 1 year after the court decision, Eleanor woke up with an idea she had been cultivating for some time. She walked to the stable, where Shadow greeted her with a joyful neigh. "Good morning, my friend," she smiled, stroking the horse's muzzle. "How about we do something special today?" With Robert's help, who had moved closer to the ranch after the events of the previous year, Eleanor organized a small event. They invited Sarah, Dr. Thompson, and some neighbors who had supported her fight to keep Shadow. When the guests arrived, they found the ranch transformed. Colorful ribbons decorated the fences. A table laden with treats was set up in the yard, and Shadow, brushed until he shone, sported a blue ribbon in his mane. Eleanor, radiant, welcomed everyone. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Today is not just a celebration of our legal victory. It's a celebration of new beginnings, of unexpected friendships, and of the power of love and compassion." Robert, standing beside his mother, raised a glass. "Our toast to Shadow," he proclaimed, "the horse who not only found a home but brought new life to this ranch and to all of us." The guests applauded, and Shadow, as if understanding that he was the center of attention, neighed cheerfully. The afternoon passed in an atmosphere of joy and gratitude. Sarah, now a close friend of the family, shared how the act of testifying in favor of Shadow had given her the courage to rebuild her own life. Dr. Thompson spoke about how Shadow's case had inspired him to create a rehabilitation program for rescued animals. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Eleanor stepped away from the group a bit. Shadow, noticing her movement, followed her. Together they walked to a small hill that offered a panoramic view of the ranch. "Look at all this, my friend," Eleanor murmured, hugging Shadow's neck. "Who would have thought that that day when you showed up injured and scared would be the beginning of something so wonderful?" Shadow responded with a soft neigh, resting his muzzle against Eleanor's face. "You know," she continued, "I spent so many years thinking my life was over, that there was nothing left for me but loneliness. You showed me how wrong I was. Each day is a new beginning, a new chance to love, to care, to make a difference." At that moment, looking at the ranch full of life and friends, Eleanor felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. Tears of joy ran down her face as she hugged Shadow. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving me." The sound of approaching footsteps made Eleanor turn. It was Robert, followed by Sarah and the other guests. "Mom," Robert called with a smile, "everyone's asking for you and we have a surprise." Intrigued, Eleanor followed the group back to the house. There she found a large banner stretched out, "Grand Opening of Shadow's Refuge for Rescued Animals." Eleanor looked at Robert, confused. He explained, "Mom, your story with Shadow inspired a lot of people. We got donations and support to transform part of the ranch into a refuge for animals that need a second chance, just like Shadow. Too emotional to speak, Eleanor simply hugged her son, then each of those present. Shadow, as if understanding the importance of the moment, positioned himself beside her, imposing and gentle. As night fell, the guests began to say goodbye, leaving behind promises of help and support for the new project. Finally, Eleanor found herself alone with Shadow, contemplating the stars that were beginning to dot the sky. "A refuge," she murmured to Shadow. "A place of hope and new beginnings. I guess that's how life should be, isn't it? Always giving us the chance to start over, to do better, to love more." Shadow neighed softly as if agreeing. Eleanor smiled, feeling more alive and full of purpose than she ever imagined possible at this stage of her life. As they walked back to the house, Eleanor reflected on the incredible journey she had lived. From a lonely lady to the guardian of a special horse, and now founder of an animal refuge. Life indeed had surprising ways of gifting us with new opportunities. "Come on, Shadow," she said, stroking the horse's neck. "We have a lot of work ahead of us, and I can't wait to get started." 5 years passed since the inauguration of Shadow's refuge for rescued animals. Miss Eleanor's ranch, once a place of solitude and melancholic memories, now pulsed with life and purpose. On a sunny Sunday morning, Eleanor, now 80 years old, but with a youthful gleam in her eyes, walked through the refuge grounds. Beside her, Shadow trotted peacefully, his black coat still lustrous though now sprinkled with a few white hairs. The refuge had grown beyond the most optimistic expectations. Dozens of rescued animals, horses, dogs, cats, and even some farm animals, had found a temporary or permanent home there. Volunteers came and went, bringing with them energy and dedication. Eleanor stopped near a new stable, observing a group of children participating in an equine therapy program. A smile lit up her face as she watched a shy girl gaining confidence while petting a rescued pony. "Look at that, Shadow," she murmured. "Who would have thought our story would inspire all of this?" As if understanding, Shadow neighed softly. Not far from there, Robert supervised the construction of a new veterinary wing. He had left his job in the city to dedicate himself fully to the refuge, finding there a vocation he never knew he had. Sarah, who had become a constant figure at the refuge, was leading a group of visitors, sharing stories of rescue and recovery. Her voice, once timid and hesitant, now overflowed with confidence and passion. As she walked back to the main house, Eleanor reflected on how a single decision to take in an injured horse had triggered a wave of positive changes that went far beyond herself. On the porch, a surprise awaited her. Her youngest grandson, Peter, 12 years old, was sitting on the steps, a rescued puppy in his lap. "Grandma," he exclaimed upon seeing her, "look who arrived last night." "Can we keep him?" Eleanor smiled, sitting down next to her grandson. "Well, that depends. Are you ready for the responsibility?" Peter nodded energetically. "I learned from the best, didn't I?" Laughing, Eleanor hugged her grandson. "Then I guess we have a new member in the family." That night, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, Eleanor watched the sun set over the ranch. Shadow grazed peacefully nearby, the soft sounds of the refuge animals creating a comforting symphony. She thought about how her life had changed. From loneliness to purpose, from isolation to a vibrant community, each rescued animal, each smile from a child in therapy, each volunteer inspired to make a difference. All these were seeds of hope planted by that unlikely encounter years ago. "Thank you, my friend," she whispered to Shadow, "for teaching me that it's never too late for a new beginning."